Hello, my rubber hearts. Today we are opening a toolbox episode that sits right at the heart of rubber technology, but for some reason it's the one topic that new technologists almost never get taught properly. We talk endlessly about formulations, ingredients, cure systems, fancy additives, but the truth is simple. Sometimes none of it matters if the mixing is bad. You can have the perfect recipe on paper and still make terrible rubber in real life if your fillers aren't dispersed. So today we are going to talk about filler dispersion, why it can change the material properties as much as formula itself, and what good and bad dispersion really look like when you hold a sample in your hand. Let's start with what a filled rubber compound actually is. When you add carbon black, silica, clay, or any other filler, your mixer has two jobs. First, it has to break down the agglomerates, those little clusters of particles that cling together. Second, it has to spread those particles evenly through the polymer so the rubber sees them as part of the network instead of as big lumps. If the mixer fails at the first job, you get undispersed granules. If it fails at the second, you get streaks, bands, hard spots, and inconsistent behavior from one corner of the sheet to another. And that inconsistency shows up everywhere. Hardness, tensile, tear, dynamic properties, cure rate, scorch safety. Everything is affected. Carbon black is a classic example. When it's properly dispersed, it reinforces the polymer, raises modulus, improves abrasion resistance, and gives you a beautiful even surface. But when the dispersion is poor, the compound loses strength, tears easily, cures unevenly, and becomes unpredictable. Instead of acting like a reinforcing filler, those big agglomerates behave like defects. They interrupt the strain field, they trigger cracks, and they make the material fail at lower loads. So the exact same formula can behave like two completely different rubbers depending only on the mixing quality. Silica adds another dimension because silica not only needs good breakup, it needs proper silane coupling. If the dispersion is weak, the silane doesn't react evenly and you end up with patches of uncoupled silica. Those patches behave like chalk, soft, crumbly, and wet tinged. Meanwhile, the well-coupled areas behave like reinforced, low hysteresis rubber. One part of the compound runs hot, another part runs cool, and the finished product has no uniformity. This is why silica compounding demands tighter mixing control than carbon black. A few extra degrees, a few seconds too long, a slightly wrong dump temperature, everything shifts. And dispersion isn't something you guess at. You can evaluate it directly. In development labs, we often use microtome slices and look at them under the microscope. You can see the filler clusters clearly. Dark spots for carbon black, bright particles for silica. Smooth, even fields mean success. Big clusters mean the mixer struggled. Some labs use dispersion rating scales, level 1 through 5, or percent undispersed area, to make it numerical. And factory lines often use quick cut and peel tests or dispergrader images to check batch-to-batch consistency. What you will notice is that mixing quality controls the properties more strongly than small formulation tweaks. If you change the carbon black grade but keep the dispersion excellent, you get predictable changes. If you keep the formulation constant but let the dispersion drift across batches, your properties swing wildly. That's why experienced technologists say, fix the mixing before you fix the formula. The formula lives on paper. The rubber lives in the mixer. The practical side is where this becomes real. The mixer has to reach the right temperature by the right time. You need the right blade speed, friction ratio, fill factor, and ram pressure. You need enough energy to break the filler clusters, but not so much that you scorch the batch. And then you need a proper finishing stage on the mill or second pass mix to smooth out the remaining striations. A compound that looks smooth on the mill but fails under the microscope is more common than you would think. Dispersion control is also how we bridge development work in the lab with real-world factory mixing. A lab internal mixer gives you tiny, precise batches with ideal shear, but the factory mixer is bigger, slower, hotter, and more variable. So technologists often adjust dump temperature, rotor speed, or feed sequence to match the lab dispersion as closely as possible. You don't just transfer the formula, you transfer the dispersion quality. That's the real scale up. So the lesson for today is simple. You can design the smartest compound in the world, but its performance will depend on how well the fillers were broken down and blended into the rubber. Dispersion is the hidden structure inside every compound. It's the difference between textbook properties and production reality. And when you start paying attention to it, really seeing it, you will understand why some batches sing and others fight you at every step. That's your toolbox episode today by Rubber Hearts. In the next ones, we will keep building this bridge between lab development and factory control so you can create compounds that behave the way you intended, not the way the mixer decided on its own. Until then, stay elastic and stay curious.